In progress. My name is Jeff Tyne. I'm chairing for right now as City Manager of City of Peoria. And for those around the table, we do ask that you please turn off your microphone when speaking so that those on the phone can hear you. For those participating via Zoom, please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you are not speaking to create a positive experience for all attendees. Phone participants should use *6 to unmute, mute, and *9 to raise their hand. And thank you for attending today's meeting. The MAG public comment process provides opportunities for members of the public to comment on items scheduled on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. There are 3 opportunities are provided for public comment, including call for the audience, consent agenda, and action items to be heard. MAG also provides opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website prior to the meeting, as long as the comments are received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. If you would like to comment on today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table in the hallway. And please be sure to indicate the item for which you want to speak and give it to the designated MAG staff member. I believe there have been no comments that were received 1 hour prior to the meeting at this point. Also a reminder, if you parked in the garage, remember to validate your ticket. Parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. And for those who purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see your staff for a ticket. Please note that hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. And with that, we will now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members. So staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Management Committee. I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate if you are present. Patrick Banger.
Present.
Thank you. Jeffrey Barton.
Present.
Thank you. Jean Blackman.
Here.
Thank you. Scott Butler, proxy for Christopher Brady.
Present.
Thank you. Les Brown. Andrew Ching.
Present.
Thank you. Dan Cotterman. Kathleen Curley. Philip Dorchester. Crystal Dykes.
Present.
Thank you. Carrie Dyrek.
Present.
Thank you. Jeff Graves, proxy for Lisa Garcia.
Here.
Thank you. Katie Proctor, proxy for Director Halikowski.
Here.
Thank you. Rick Horst. Julie Cairns.
Here.
Did I hear Julie Cairns?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Jill Kymack. John Cross.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Kulaga. Leo Liu. Reyes Medrano.
Here.
Thank you. Proxy for Jessica Mefford Miller, Alexis Tamaron Kinsey.
Present.
Thank you. Jennifer Jack, proxy for Brian Myers.
Here.
Thank you. Grady Miller.
Here.
Thank you. Gary Nice. Charlene Panilla, proxy is Marshall Pimentel.
Present.
Thank you. Proxy for Kevin Phelps is Jamshid Mehta.
Present.
Thank you. Matt Busby is proxy for Bryant Powell. Leanne Bond is proxy for Joy Rich.
Present.
Thank you. Bill Murphy is proxy for Jim Thompson.
Here.
Thank you. Chair Jeff Tyne. Thank you. Catherine Valenzuela.
Present.
Thank you. Matthew Williams. Thank you. Bob Wingenroth.
Present.
Thank you. Joshua Wright.
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you much. If I may
Mr.
ask-
Chair, could we just, so Jill Climack is on, I think, in the meeting. Jill?
Great. And we do have Dan Cotterman here as well.
Yes. And Dan Buckeye, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I may ask that we all please join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. Our next item is called to the audience. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda item unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. Members of the public who are attending in person may deliver their comments from the lectern at the front of the room. You have up to 3 minutes to complete your comments. A timer is provided to assist you. When the light on the timer changes from green to yellow, you will have 1 minute remaining. If the light turns red, a buzzer will sound, meaning your allotted time has expired. At this time, I have not received any speaker cards for this item. Are there any other members of the public here today who wish to speak on this item? Great. Seeing none then, at this point, we will, do we have any written comments for this item as well?
Mr. Chair, we do not have any written comments that were submitted for this item or any item on the agenda.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, at this point, we'll move to item number 4, Executive Director's Report. And MAG Executive Director Eric Anderson will provide this for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Management Committee. A few items that hopefully will be of interest to you. You can go to the next slide. So last week on August 2nd, we held our annual crossing guard training workshops. This is the first time we've had these in person, so we're very excited about that. We typically have had 3 sessions. We only had 1 this year, ramping up slowly, once again, given the after effects of the pandemic. So really pleased about this. This is a program that's actually been going on for more than 50 years here in this region. City of Phoenix managed the program for a number of years. MAG took this over 10 to 15 years ago. So I'm very pleased about that. Go to the next slide. Something to put on your calendar, Age Friendly Arizona Conference, September 20th, 2022, coming up. The event is free, but you have to register, pre-register, and I suggest you do it soon. Slots are filling up fairly quickly. So you see our partners there. Really appreciate all the support we receive for this conference. Go to the next slide. In early June, we sponsored a trip to Hermosillo, an economic mission to Hermosillo. Supervisor Sellers and Mayor Hermosillo from El Mirage provided our elected leadership for this session. MAG staff, Elsa Beljean and Kelly Williams, provided staff support for this tour. Very well received. The whole theme was binational trade, in particular, some of the high-tech investments too. So we had a nice note from GPEC that really thanked us for putting this together. They have a lot of follow-up contacts from that session. So really appreciate the support of our member agencies for these economic missions. Go to the next slide. So in June, the Management Committee recommended support of the Canadian Snowbirds Act. This is the act that would allow Canadian citizens meeting certain criteria to be in the country longer than, I think, 90 days. So once again, the EDC Regional Council all recommended approval of this. Regional Council approved it on June 22nd. And we've sent letters of support with Senator Sinema and Kelly. So it's in the reconciliation bill being negotiated in Congress. You can go to the next slide. Another upcoming event put on your calendar as part of the League of Arizona Cities and Towns. This is our annual session, Arizona Council, which is the Arizona Sonoran joint meeting of elected officials from Sonora and our elected officials from Arizona. So great opportunity to meet your counterparts in Sonora. If you have any questions, Elsa Beljean here at MAG is the contact for that event. That's at September 1st at 2:30 in the afternoon. Go to the next slide. And the last thing I'll share with you, we hosted a group of 27 participants from the Mandela Washington Fellowship of Young African Leaders, really a cross-section of leaders, young leaders from across the continent of Africa, representing disciplines, everything from engineering, transportation, human services, public policy, you name it. Had a very, very interesting and fruitful discussion with the group. So we've done this in the past. We'll continue to do this. This is well received. This is the fellowship is a state department program, and it's hosted by ASU here in the Valley. So, Mr. Chair, that completes my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Wonderful information. This item is for information only. And so we do ask that you please contact Eric if you have any other follow-up on any of these different items. So thank you, Eric. Next up, we do have approval of the consent agenda. So items 5A through 5J are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the management committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Seeing and hearing none. Prior to approval of the consent agenda, do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on consent? And again, seeing none, we appreciate that. So from this point, I have no request to speak cards for the consent agenda item that I know of. Staff, any other written comments or questions at this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've not received any written comments for this agenda item.
Great, thank you very much. So then can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items 5A through 5J?
Move to.
So moved. This is Grady from Fountain Hills.
We have Grady from Fountain Hills.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Wingenroth. Great, thank you. Can I have a voice vote for those in the room, and then those in favor say aye, those that are opposed say nay.
Aye.
Aye.
And staff, if you'll please take a roll of the members that are participating virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I will go down the list of members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Jean Blackman.
Yes.
Thank you. Crystal Dykes.
Aye.
Thank you. Carrie Dyrick.
Aye.
Thank you. Jeff Graves.
Aye.
Thank you. Katie Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Julie Cairns.
Aye.
Thank you. Jill Kymack.
Aye.
Thank you. Reyes Medrano.
Aye.
Thank you. Grady Miller.
Aye.
Thank you. Marshall Pimentel.
Aye.
Thank you. Leanne Bond.
Aye.
Thank you. Catherine Valenzuela.
Aye.
Thank you. Joshua Wright.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Great, thank you very much. With that, we will move to item 6, bringing together regional stakeholders to address homelessness. And here to present and also introduce our guest speaker, Ryan Balch, is MAG Human Services Planner to Katie Gentry. And this item is for information and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee for this opportunity to provide an update on the work to address homelessness. We have continued to work collaboratively to address homelessness, and it would not be possible without the regional commitment from all of you. Next slide, please. Want to give you a quick overview of the presentation before I hand it off to Ms. Balch, really on the work that we have undertaken both with the continuum of care and with Pathways Home. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ryan Balch. She is the co-chair of the Continuum of Care Board and the Community Development and Resources Manager for the City of Chandler. Ryan.
Thanks so much, Katie, and Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'd like to start today with just a brief description of our current funding and then talk about a couple of highlights and some recent accomplishments. Next slide, please. So each summer, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, releases a Notice of Opportunity, or NOFO. And this past year, we received over $35 million to fund 32 programs, which is an increase of over $2.7 million from the previous year. These dollars support 2,200 beds across our county. Last year, we received the highest score that we've ever received as a region, thanks to the excellent work of our provider agencies, the collaboration of regional stakeholders, and MAG staff who just prepared an outstanding application. As a result, we received 3 additional projects, resulting in 57 new beds and an expansion of our homeless management information system, also referred to as HMIS, which will further our ability to utilize data to continually improve our homeless service delivery system here in the Valley. At the end of June, HUD announced a supplemental NOFO specifically focused on serving persons who are unsheltered who have severe service needs. In all my years working in this field, I have not ever seen a supplemental NOFO, so this is really exciting for our region. As a region, we have the potential to bring in $28 million new dollars through this supplemental NOFO. So as we speak, providers and partners across our region are developing applications that will be put forward in an application through MAG staff in October. Next slide, please. Another really exciting innovation that's just come to pass in our continuum of care is the development and implementation of a local jurisdiction subcommittee. So the purpose of this new subcommittee is to ensure that every jurisdiction has a seat at the table for regional planning and policy development related to homelessness. The subcommittee will continue the great collaboration that has been happening across jurisdictions over, I'd say, the past 2 years when COVID happened. If you haven't already, each of you will have the opportunity to appoint a local representative from your jurisdiction as well as a proxy to serve on this new subcommittee that will report to the governing board. We will have our first meeting this month. Very exciting. Next slide, please. A couple of things we've been working on. So for those of you who are lovers of data and evaluation, I wanted to highlight some of the work that is being coordinated between the Continuum of Care and our Pathways Home Plan. We are in the midst of completing evaluations both on our homeless management information system database and also our coordinated entry system, which serves the entire region. Both of these systems are requirements of HUD to receive the kind of continuum of care dollars that we do. We expect to finish the first phases of both of these evaluations at the end of this calendar year, and then to start implementing some of those recommendations for improvements beginning in January of 2023. And then last, we've also just finished mapping our homeless outreach activities across the Valley. And so we're really now in a better position to coordinate outreach efforts through the alignment of policies and procedures that impact outreach services. Next slide. And last but not least, I just wanted to share with you some upcoming sort of tangible innovations. We have just completed a new toolkit and there are more to come. The first one that was developed was the Inter-Departmental Teams Toolkit, and it is now on MAG's website and ready to be shared. The Inter-Departmental Teams Toolkit highlights how jurisdictions can implement an interdepartmental team or grow the work of their existing teams that are already functioning. I know here in Chandler, our interdepartmental team, which we affectionately refer to as IHOT for Interdepartmental Homeless Operations Team, have been instrumental in ensuring coordination across disciplines and departments, and I hope this tool will be useful for all of you as well. There are a number of other toolkits that the Continuum is in the process of developing. For instance, in development is a toolkit to develop homeless specific specialty courts, and also another on how to engage faith networks in this very important work. So with that, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to, or even if there are, I'm going to turn it back over to Katie.
Next slide. Thank you, Ryan. Next slide again. As you may have seen before, every one of these 14 activities within these 3 action steps are underway. You will continue to see this kind of quarter after quarter as we continue to update you all on the progress of the action steps. But I will offer a few key details on the upcoming slides. Next slide. The first one I wanted to highlight is the letters of commitment. This has been a huge undertaking, not only for our staff, but all of your staff, and really understanding the resources dedicated to addressing homelessness. And you all continue to add additional resources year over year. We have had over $107 million in cash and $10 million in kind, as well as $163 million in other resources. You will see a slight decrease in contributions compared to the previous year, as some of our federal dollars that came in through all of you were allocated over multiple years and will be continuing to get spent. But overall, we have continued to see the growth in spending on homelessness to really address this full force. Next slide, please. I also wanted to share an update with you where we are with the housing targets. When we first developed the plan, we calculated the number of temporary and permanent housing units based on analysis of the system flow data. And we really did that on a one-year basis. And so we've now shrunk that down and are doing this analysis quarterly to be more responsive to what is happening, with the projected units to reduce homelessness by 25%. The other note I will add is that House America really sped up our timeline from 2027 to the end of 2022. And so I will provide an update on that. Next slide, please. Within the temporary housing units, you'll see that there is an updated additional units needed are 460. When we first released the plan, we had 770 units needed. And even though we have continued to open up new projects like the Washington Street Shelter, Respiro at the Human Services Campus, and iHelp in Peoria, thanks to your help, we still have a gap missing. So that green really represents the gap, and the blue represents the committed that will open prior to 2027. So even though we have made great strides in this, we still have a little bit room to grow. Next slide, please. This graph shows a much different scale. Initially, we needed 1,225 units, and the updated number is 1,322. Of that, we still have 1,748 units that have been committed by local jurisdictions that will open prior to 2027. But I want to caution us, because during our last update, we shared that we had over 2,500 units that had been committed since the beginning of 2021, and we've already had folks move into those units. So this number is less than that previous number. Threshold has been a huge opportunity funded by Maricopa County to be able to place folks into these units very quickly and adapt to our current market. As we all know, affordable housing is very difficult to find. So I want to go to the next slide and really share the projections that we see. On this blue line, you'll see our supply. So that is the number of units that you all have been committed. The green is really our need, and we see that staying consistent because we have so many new people coming into our system, which is shown through the purple line there. Unfortunately, as much as other steps of Pathways Home are trying to limit that increase of new people coming into our system, we do see the impacts of the economy and the impacts of COVID-19 really reflected in this number of new people that we've seen that have never before been seen within the homeless response system. Next slide. Lastly, I wanted to give a quick update on House America. This is a goal to rehouse 1,225 people experiencing homelessness and add 300 units into the development pipeline. We are currently 60% of the way through the challenge at the end of June, and we have rehoused 68% of our goal and added 40% to the development pipeline and counting. We know that as we continue, we are right on track, and we are really hoping to speed up that development pipeline so we're able to accomplish that goal by the end of the year. Next slide. Finally, I wanted to touch on coordination efforts across Pathways Home. We've been working through developing a funding filter to really understand how we can weave the different funding of local jurisdictions, state partners, and private foundations to really understand the breadth and depth of funding going in to homelessness. We are working with Home Matters to Arizona and partnering with you all and your public information officers and the local jurisdiction committee that Ryan mentioned to really understand what needs to be included in this public education campaign. And we will be continuing to work through that with Home Matters to Arizona. And finally, we are in the very initial stages of developing an affordable housing plan in coordination with public and private partners, and we'll have more to come on that in the future. Next slide. Before I wrap up, I just want to talk about a few next steps. Next slide. Here is a list of upcoming meetings as the work continues to fully implement Pathways Home and integrate with the continuum of care. You or your staff are more than welcome to attend any of these meetings, and you can reach out to myself to get any of these meeting invites or any of our staff. We also have on our website a complete calendar of all the upcoming meetings that you or your staff are welcome to attend. And with that, next slide. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I just want to say thank you for your continued support and time today. And I'm available for any questions or comments from all of you.
Great. Thank you, Katie and Ryan, and just great progress. Do any of our members have questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Josh Wright in Chandler.
Please go ahead, Mr. Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to make a couple of general comments. First of all, thank you, Ms. Gentry, Ms. Balch. Excellent presentation. It's exciting to see the progress that's been made in just a short amount of time, and especially very recently on this important issue. I wanted to just thank MAG and Ms. Gentry, Ms. Balch for the level of work that has gone into this. I think if I'm thinking back on last year and all the conversations we were having around the issue of homelessness at the regional level, it certainly feels like the level of data, the level of analysis, the level of conversation about this issue regionally has certainly been elevated. And I know certainly here in Chandler, the work that has been going on regionally has helped us elevate and refocus our own conversation. So wanted to thank you for all the efforts that have been made to date. Also wanted to particularly recognize Ms. Balch, since she is one of our City of Chandler team members, and she did not mention this in her presentation, but she's actually toward the end of her chairmanship at the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care. And so wanted to thank her not only for the great work she does with our team here in Chandler around homelessness, but also at the regional level to continue moving this ball down the field. Thank you so much, Chairman.
Josh, thank you. Very, very great comments. And obviously, we encourage every jurisdiction to make sure that they participate in the local jurisdiction subcommittee. That sounds like an exciting opportunity and an amazing integration of such a complex world. So congratulations to MAG staff, to Ryan as well. Great. Thank you. If there are no other questions, we'll move to agenda item 7. Is the emerging economic and housing trends. This will be presented by MAG Regional Analytics Director Anubhav Bagley, and this item also is for information and discussion. Thank you, Mr. Bagley.
Can everybody hear me? Great. Clicker. Brian, okay, next slide. I can go through this. I'm going to be going through a lot of data. As you look at this, please realize we have a lot of this data thanks to our member agencies. A lot of this data can be aggregated to your geographies, whatever you're interested in. But I'm going to keep this discussion more at the regional level. So starting with the good news, unemployment is low in our region and the state and the country. 2.7% is Phoenix MSA's our employment, and it's lower than the US. Next slide, please. And what you're seeing is a lot of major large businesses being attracted. This map is showing you the GPEC major locates since 2018. We've had large locates of about 42,000 some jobs. Some of the largest ones up, North Phoenix, TSMC, all kinds in different sectors, technology, finance, all the sectors that we really want to be attracting and bringing into the region. Next slide, please. We looked at this to start seeing how has our economy diversified. And this is a heavy chart. I'm going to spend a little bit of time more in this. Since in the past 20 years, we've added about 450,000 some jobs. And you start seeing what occupations grew, whether these were higher wage occupations or lower wage occupations. And in general, this is indicating that they're moving up, we're diversifying, we're attracting more jobs that are higher wage, those shares are growing. So for example, healthcare grew by 6.2% in these past 20 years. Finance grew by 1.5% in these past 20 years as a share of the whole. That means we're attracting more of the higher wage jobs. So that's good news. Next slide, please. The other piece of good news is that our personal income is going up, and it's actually gone up higher than the US average. Our per capita income now is up to $51,800 in 2020. And this was up by 12.4%, while the US was up by 10%. So we're doing good on this too. Next slide, please. Starting to now start getting onto the doom kind of stuff that Eric loves doing. And this is the inflation side of things. We are talking about something that we all hear. Our inflation has always generally been higher than the US average, though the US number actually should be corrected. We just got the number for US. It's now 8.5%. For the first time, I got gas yesterday, less than $4 per gallon. So that was good. But this definitely is impacting our larger economy. Next slide, please. This is looking at the US on a whole. And what you're seeing is savings rates, what's going on in per capita savings, personal savings. And what you saw is during the pandemic, our personal savings went up. You had a lot of government spending coming in. You got a lot of checks coming in on assistance, etc., and costs were lower. So our savings were higher. We're now leveling down back. That is slowly coming down again. This data is only at the US level. So changing tracks, next slide, please. Start looking at the housing industry, kind of looking at different pieces, moving from the economy to the housing. The housing industry changed quite a bit in the past 20 years. In the early 2000s, our region, and this is for Maricopa County only, our region, we were building around 40,000 some housing units total per year. The highest was in 2005, just before our big downturn, and we were about 48,600. Then we came down, 2011 being the lowest, about 6,600. We have now grown 300% since then. From that 6,600, we're now up to 2,700. Next slide, please. What really you see is in the 2000 to 2010, 11 years, we built about 389,000 housing units in this region, in the Maricopa County. That declined to about 222,000 housing units. But that's the market. That was how you were adjusting and things were changing. Next slide, please. The other side of the puzzle, that was all housing units, total housing units. This is looking at just the apartments itself. Apartments, again, we've been building a lot of apartments and actually had the same kind of track, which came down to actually 230 apartments being built in 2011, but now has gone up. Next slide, please. And what you really see is the number of total apartment units being built stayed about constant within the two. So your total residential completions actually declined quite a bit. Total apartments still kept building. So we've increased our share of apartments by about 11% over these two time periods. Next slide, please. That's what's being built. This is what's in the pipeline. So MAG staff, working with all your staff, we collect data on active developments, planned developments, platted developments from the assessor. This is looking at all those development projects, how many housing units are currently in the 2021 MAG database. And we've got about 221,000 housing units that are currently in that active platted status. Of these, about 25% may already have been constructed just with residential completions, etc. But what you start seeing is across the board, central in the chart is really City of Phoenix, which is just under 40,000. And then east is everything east of City of Phoenix, which is about 60,000 some units that are in the works, and 81,000 some units that are west of Phoenix, and then about 43,000 some in Pinal. So there's a lot that's going on in our pipeline. Next slide, please. But while that is going on, you have to look at how many housing units are sitting vacant. And so this chart has two components. One is the overall total vacancy rate, and then there is the seasonal component of the vacancy rate. So the lines in blue are really those homes that are sitting vacant. Nobody comes in and lives with those. The gray portion is that additional that is held for seasonal use. What's very interesting, back in 2010, this was 16% overall. We had 16% of our housing units either completely vacant or sitting in some form of seasonal use. That number is now 8%, and only 5% of our units are sitting completely vacant at this time. So obviously, there is a higher demand. We are attracting a lot more population. There's a lot more in migration that's going on, that's driving our vacancy rates down. Next slide, please. So obviously, this is the big story. Housing prices have been going up. We've all heard about this. Since 2020, about 63% increase. This is total housing price in the metro area. So what was for Phoenix MSA, what used to be 285,000 back in January 2020 is now 465,000. A single family median sales price is about 500,000. Now, this data is up to June. We've looked at some cursory data coming in for July, and you definitely start seeing this coming down. There's definitely a downward trend, a leveling off and a downward trend. As mortgage rates are coming up, you start seeing that downward trend happening on that. Next slide, please. So the other side, which is very interesting, looking at this data to start seeing what was going on or what is going on in the sales price of new construction versus existing homes. And this chart clearly is showing us what was happening in terms of the run up in prices. The darker line is existing home prices, which went from 2011, somewhere in the 125 median to about 465,000 in May 2020. Well, new construction, which is the lighter color, used to be about 25% higher. That actually became about the same. And there was a time period where the existing homes resale prices were higher than the new construction. This really points to a lot of exuberance. The market was really very hot. Interest rates were low. So there's a lot of activity happening there and maybe not enough supply on the construction, new construction, but also pointing to the supply chain and the lack of certain supply chains and events that were happening towards the later end of this time period. Next slide, please. So interest rates have gone up. The 30-year mortgage rate is about 3% higher than the lowest that has been. And what you're seeing are two things happening on the chart on the left. You definitely start seeing the inventory of available housing that is listed on MLS now has gone up 78%. And actually, the lowest, that blue line is the 2021-22 time period. The lowest was about March this year, about 8,500 units. It's double that now, actually even higher now at this time. The other chart is showing you the average number of days that homes are sitting on the market, and that's starting to trend up. So the market is not as hot. It is not that seller's market anymore. We're moving more towards a buyer's market at this time. But the other side, I'd say, is we're not seeing any signs of distress at this time. So this is not what we saw back in the early, mid 2000s, 2006, 7, 8 time period. You're not seeing a lot of REO activity, bank ownership, etc., because there is a lot of liquidity in the houses itself. They have a lot of equity in the houses. So wherever there's a problem, if you overextended, they are able to take into that. So we're not seeing a lot of distress at this time. Next slide, please. So where are all these buyers coming from? What's going on with this market? And I can tell you that about 16% of the sales have been out of state. Those are your seasonal people moving in, people coming in here for jobs because they got attracted with the area. But this also includes your large investors looking into this area, housing, buying homes for either fixing and flipping or for putting them up for rent. That's a big component. San Francisco, that's where Open Door is sitting. That's where Open Door is. Dallas, that suddenly showed up as one of our top 5. That is another large investing group that is buying homes here to rent. That's one of those things that is changing in this market, that you're seeing a lot of investment activity coming in, buying single family homes for rental activity. There's a lot of others because we are definitely a very attractive community, a very attractive area for folks to move to. So in general, those buying from out of state, the sales price is higher from those areas. Next slide, please. Related to that is how are folks financing these homes? Well, in the recent few months or since December 2020, about 34%, 1 in every 3 home was bought full cash. It was not mortgaged. And it was done all across the region, not in every price point this was going on. Over the past 5 years, that average has been about 25%. So we've got the data on looking at this piece. Now, a lot of this was investors coming in. A lot of this was people moving from other states that are looking at that. But this definitely puts an upward pressure on your housing prices to start going up on that direction. Next slide, please. One other piece that I've discussed before is 26% of our housing stock is either seasonal or investor. They're owned by somebody whose mailing address is not the same as the property address. There's a large volume in this that are investors as such. They pay higher for these homes, and this counts to about 364,000 housing units in this region. That's what's sitting in investor activity, seasonal activity. There are about 4% that are owned by people that live outside the country. Now, again, some of these could be that the people have bought these, companies have bought these and put for rent, so they are being used. Some of these are sitting vacant, back to that 3% seasonal vacancy rate. So it just depends what's going on the housing side of stuff. Next slide, please. The other thing that's been new in the past since 2014 is these single family subdivisions, complexes that are built for rent. Kind of that same piece that we saw after the 2010 downturn. You had large companies coming in and buying single family homes all over the valley and putting them for rent. These subdivisions are actually being completely built for rent. And that number currently we have, our data says about 5,500 units that are currently active and being rented at this time, and about 21,000 some that are planned or under construction at this time. So again, one of those other pieces that is changing the market on the housing side. Next slide, please. One of the other changes or disruptors, as one may call it, that has happened is your short-term rentals, Airbnbs, Verbos. We've looked at data on how many homes are listed, the full home, not just one room, the full home. And based on that, we can say about 23,000 some homes in Maricopa County are listed annually on VRBO or Airbnb. That's about 1.2% of our housing stock. It's even interesting looking at it statewide, it's about 42,000 homes statewide. In our region, Paradise Valley, about 5.9% of the housing stock, Scottsdale, 4.3% of the housing stock. This obviously then translates to our Census 2020 data, which showed that Scottsdale's vacancy rates were higher than one expected because you had a lot of homes that were in seasonal or being rented or used as hotels. We've looked at the data for our region. These on an average generate about $40,000 a year. That's the average number. And we've got the detailed data on this piece on this. Next slide, please. Moving from that, going on to single family rental. Once again, prices on single family rental have gone up quite a bit. Under $1,500 per month is really not available now. What used to be about 60% of the market. So the dark blue in 2017 was under $1,500 per month for renting a single family home. That's not available anymore. Under 2,000 has declined from 85% of the market to about 28%. So again, a big change. Next slide, please. Not a big surprise in terms of the median rents and what they are, that which part of the valley have a higher median rent for a single family home versus lower single family rent. But the big piece out of this really is that those lighter areas where you have rents that are lower than 1,500 or even under 2,000 are low vacancy. So those homes, even if they're available, they're not vacant. So you don't have that inventory available for anybody to be able to rent at that price point. Next slide, please. Moving to apartments, something I've discussed before. This is data looking at apartment median rent over time since 2010 till now. Dark blue was $500. No, that's not available. Under $1,000 really is not part of the market anymore. It's now just about 10%, what used to be 93%. What you start seeing is that luxury market coming in. You have those luxury apartments, which are now in that $2,000 plus per month that are available. Next slide, please. We also looked at something very interesting in terms of, so we've been building apartments. We discussed that there is a number of apartment share changed. Pricing on apartments, that those were built pre-2018 and post-2018, there is about a 25-30% rent per square foot gap. Apartments built, newer apartments that are built are about 25 to 30% higher priced per square foot than those built before that. So it's not that we're not building. It's just that where we're building or the price point of those newer ones is higher. And that may be causing that piece on the affordability side. Next slide, please. So again, showing the data that we have on all apartment complexes with 50 or more units at every location. And green's good. Green are where you have apartment rents generally averaging under 1,500. Reds are the ones that are in the 2,500 plus. Again, those areas that you're seeing are the lower apartment rents are also low vacancy. You don't have enough availability of that product at that time. So it kind of points to that. Next slide, please. So finally, coming back to the single family sales side stuff. Really, our transactions under 300,000, as we discussed before, really not existing anymore. Under 300 used to be 88%, as in the blue bar in 2011. Now it is about 13%, etc. So it's declining. You kind of see that market. You see the blue, the light blue show up. The higher prices one above 500,000 now is about 38% of the sales were in the above $500,000. Next slide, please. So we looked at median sales price change in the past 5 years. This map, darker colors are where the darker blues are where price doubled in the past 5 years. And on an average, overall, the median price went up by about 93%. There are certain areas, the lighter blues and the lighter yellows are where it went up 50 to 75%. But the darker ones were really where they went up really high. And those areas that are under that hatch pattern, you see those are areas which are higher poverty, population, 25% or more of that area is under poverty. Those went up 126%. So obviously you see a lot of activity from the market happening in those areas in terms of buying, flipping, renting, but those prices really went up in those areas. Next slide, please. So taking all of this and putting it together at the end is starting to look at cost burden for our households. And the map here, and really the way one defines cost burden is those households that pay 30% or more of their household income for housing cost, whether it's mortgage or rent, 30% or more of their household income. That map is showing you the percentage of households that pay more than 30% by different areas. So the darkest areas that you see, the darkest red, those areas are areas where more than 45% of households in those areas are paying more than 30%. So it takes a little bit to get this. So more than 45% of the households are cost burdened in those areas. Overall, about 230,000 households in our region are severely cost burdened. And 93% of these are in the household income of below 75,000. So that takes a little bit to kind of get, but again, there are areas that they are not as cost burdened, but this is all households. Next slide, please. Here is where we start looking at cost burdened renters. And our data is indicating that multifamily renters are really the ones that are highly cost burdened. And the darkest areas are where more than 45% of renters in those areas are highly cost burdened or cost burdened. Now, again, some of these were light in the previous map because there are not as many renters in those areas. But between the two, you can start telling the story to see where are my households and what is the type of household in that area that are highly cost burdened. So overall, about 131,000 some households in this region are paying more than 50% of their income for household, for rent or mortgage, etc. Next slide, please. I'm going to quickly go through these. So the other piece of the puzzle really to start looking at this is what's going on our workforce. You can figure out what's happening on households, what they're paying, but at the end, if you start to look at this from an economic development, population, workforce attraction, start looking at this from a workforce perspective. Well, if you look at households that are anchored by occupations which are in food prep, healthcare support, personal care service, etc. So there are more than one jobs in this household. This occupation is the highest paid occupation in this household. They, on an average, their median income in this household is between $39,000 and $50,000. 30% of that housing payment should be $993 to $1,250. Next slide, please. About, can Can we go back one, please? One more. Thank you. 43 to 50% of these households that are anchored by these occupations are cost burden. So this takes a little bit to get at, but the bottom line basically gets to is certain occupations, certain households with certain types of households are more severely impacted than others because of our housing affordability issues. Next slide, please. One more. And this one is, again, another set of occupations. This is looking at office admin, construction, arts design, sales, education, 60 to 80,000, $1,500 to $2,000 in terms of affordability. 30 to 36% are highly cost burden. Next slide, please. Going to quickly go through the census pulse data. About 65% of our households making less than 50,000 had their rent increase in the past year, and about 18% are not caught up on rent or mortgage. Next slide, please. That means our evictions are going in. Data is lining up. You see our evictions in the last month, July 22, was higher than what it was pre-pandemic. So 6,300 for this county, what used to be 5,300 back in prior to the pandemic. Next slide, please. 72% of these evictions are in lower income areas, as expected. Next slide, please. So this is my most convoluted slide, and I'm going to quickly try and go through this. Housing shortage. We keep hearing about this. We've seen stories, I've seen reports. There was a recent op-ed or a recent article from Arizona Department of Housing talking about 270,000 housing units needed. There's a report from Common Sense Institute, which says Arizona needs between 18,000 to 183,000 housing units. There's one from Up for Growth, which is 108,000 housing units. What I'm trying to get at is this is not something simple to answer. It is highly based on your assumptions. It's highly based on what factors you're using in and what data you're using to get to this answer, because it's not a simplistic piece to get to what is the housing shortage. It's dependent on factors like household formation. How many children are moving out of homes, starting their own households? How many people are forming their own households with their own partner? What's going on those pieces? What's happening in terms of migration? Who's coming in? What's happening with seasonal population, etc. Plus, on top of that, there is not good, reliable, new current data to be able to answer a lot of these. What's happening with any of these pieces? What's going on with preferences? Are millennials looking to move and start their own households, move up to a different size of a household? Are baby boomers looking to leave their existing homes and go into retirement communities or move somewhere else? Those are the kind of pieces. We don't have good data to be able to answer these housing shortage type questions. Overall, looking at all this data, I can tell you that yes, there is lack of housing choice in certain areas. Certain types of housing is not available at certain price points. That we've seen based on all that data. But getting to that number would require a lot of work and a lot of effort to kind of get to that piece to understand what is that real range. And any of these numbers, really, I would question to see what was the methodology used for that. Next slide, please. There is a lot of regional efforts that are being done at peer metros that are very interesting. Puget Sound Regional in Seattle has put out a report on how they're calculating. Atlanta Regional has put out a dashboard on looking at this by different sub areas, which would kind of make sense going forward. We've got a ton of data. I'm happy to share that with all our member agencies, et cetera, as we work through this. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or see if Eric wants to add something to this.
Now, in the interest of time, I'll defer.
Appreciate. Thank you, Anubhav. Thank you very much for a thoughtful presentation. Are there any questions or comments from? Great. Well, appreciate. I just have some staggering numbers that we all have to kind of come to grips with. This is so helpful, and we know you have even a larger slide deck that didn't even make this cut. So, really appreciate. I know another item. MAG certainly offers their assistance to provide information to us in various forms, and actually come out and do presentations like to our jurisdiction. Is that right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. Okay, we will move to item number 8. This is the second project deferral request, Maricopa County fiscal year 22 and 23 Safe Routes to School Support Activity Project, Solano and Tumbleweed. And here virtually to introduce the speaker, we have Don Cross, is MAG Transportation Safety Program Manager, Margaret Herrera. And this item is for recommendation of approval. Excuse me.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the MAG Management Committee. Just a little bit of background on this. This Maricopa County project is a Safe Routes to School support type, support activity type project. It was originally deferred back in August of 2021, along with all the other Safe Routes to School projects due to the height of the pandemic. There was no Safe Routes to School activities being conducted. And then in January of 2022, the county asked that we replace Montebello for Salado Elementary School. So with that, I will introduce Don Cross from the Maricopa County to continue the presentation. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and MAG Management Committee. Due to staffing constraints and like Margaret said about the issues with COVID, we found that we wanted to defer this to this upcoming year because it helped us with our staffing constraints. The funds would help to fund our Safe Routes to School program coordinator, and it would be for the 2022-2023 school calendar years. The schools in the grant would be Solano, Tumbleweed Elementary, and Eagle College Prep. And there would be no change to the funding amounts that we had asked for in the grants. Next slide. So we recommend approval of a second deferral request for the Maricopa County Safe Routes to School Support Activities Projects, MMA 21-803 and MMA 22-801. For funding in fiscal years 2023 and fiscal year 2024. Next slide. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair. Any questions anybody has?
Appreciate that, Don. Any questions or comments from the membership? Great. Not received a request to speak cards for this. Are there any members of the public here who desire to speak on the item? Or any written comments that we're aware of?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There have been no written comments submitted for this item.
Great, thank you. In that case, can I have a motion to recommend approval for agenda item number 8?
So moved.
It's moved by Mr. Ching and second by Mr. Murphy. So the move and second. All those in favor that are in the room, please favor by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed saying nay. And staff will do a roll call vote for all members participating virtually. Please indicate how you vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I will go down the list of members participating virtually. Please unmute and indicate how you vote. Jean Blackman.
Yes.
Thank you. Crystal Dykes.
Aye.
Thank you. Carrie Dyrick. Jeff Graves.
Aye.
Thank you. Katie Proctor.
Aye.
Thank you. Julie Cairns.
Aye.
Thank you. Jill Kymack. Reyes Medrano.
Aye.
Thank you. Grady Miller.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye from Jill Kymack too.
Thank you, Ms. Kymack. Marshall Pimentel.
Aye.
Thank you. Leanne Bond.
Aye.
Thank you. Kathy Valenzuela.
Aye.
Thank you. Joshua Wright.
Aye.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll move to item number 9 is preliminary overview of potential project and program impacts of House Bill 2685 Veto. Here to present is MAG Transportation Economic and Finance Program Manager John Bolin. And again, this item is for information discussions. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the MAG Management Committee. Happy to be here today. I know we're running very late, so I will do my best to expedite this as quickly as possible, but certainly a lot to unpack here and a very important topic. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to give a very abbreviated version of what I had presented to the joint meeting of Regional Council and TPC 2 weeks ago. First, I'll give a little bit of background about how we got here, follow that up with an overview of our investment program, and then follow that up with potential impacts to our various programs before concluding with next steps. Next slide, please. So I'll start first with background. Next step. So, I think one of the reasons why the veto was so surprising is really because of how integrated our dedicated half-cent sales tax is to this region and really everything we do. We have a long legacy of the dedicated half-cent sales tax, more than 40 years. Really, that effort was started back in the mid-1980s when business and community leaders from around Maricopa County got together, and they decided that relying on the existing revenue streams would take 60 years to build Loop 101. That's not sufficient for development. That's not sufficient for quality of life. So they got together, brought forth Prop 300 to voters in 1985, and then voters reaffirmed their commitment to the dedicated sales tax again in 2004 with the passage of Proposition 400. Next slide, please. I cannot overstate the impact that these investments have had in our regional transportation network and really all of your communities. The map on the screen shows the high capacity transportation network in Maricopa County before Proposition 300. We had I-17, parts of I-10, and parts of US 60. Next slide. Proposition 300 gave us Loop 101, Loop 202, State Route 51, and State Route 143. Next slide, please. Reflecting the needs of a maturing region, we took forth Proposition 400 in 2004. Under that, we expanded investments beyond just the freeway system. Under Proposition 400, we will have built or are building the Loop 303, Loop 202 South Mountain, the region's high capacity transit network, significant investments in arterial roads. We've either built or widened more than 250 miles of arterial roadways. The tax itself has funded more than 7.5 million miles of bus revenue service last fiscal year. We also have funding for ADA paratransit throughout the region, have funded widening on existing freeways, have funded new TIs that support important development, and made significant investments in other transportation areas such as active transportation and air quality mitigation. Next slide, please. There's a direct link between transportation and economic development. We all know it. The transportation network we have today has saved people time, saved businesses time. It has increased the number of jobs throughout our region, and it has improved property values. Next slide. When our economic development organizations from throughout the region go to sell our region to other businesses, it's the transportation network that they put front and center. Next slide. And the people get it too. The plan that we approved in 2021 is built on public feedback. The public gets the need for transportation investments. They're highly supportive of the transportation investments that have been made, and they're highly supportive of continuing to make those transportation investments. Support for the plan is north of 70%, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's based off of the needs of the public. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? Screen on the slide on the screen shows the total investment plan that we had put together that was approved by the Regional Council back in 2021. We spent the last 2-3 years developing this plan. There were a lot of tough conversations. There were a lot of compromise, significant amounts of analysis, significant amount of technical work, and of course, public feedback. The legislature on the front end told us don't consider more than a half cent. We demonstrated needs in excess of $90 billion, significant needs throughout our region. Every other county in the state of Arizona is able to go up to 1 full cent. Nevertheless, we were told by the legislature to stick at half cent, and that's what we did. And that came through compromise and deliberate work by you all. In the end, we have a plan that resulted in more than $36.8 billion worth of investments. Next slide, please. Those investments support a number of very large capital projects throughout the region. You have State Route 30 in the Southwest Valley. You have reconstruction of the I-17, the spine of the system. You have completion of State Route 24 out in the Southeast Valley. You have additional important investments in high capacity transit and a number of arterial investments that either rehabilitate existing roadways or build new roadways to support development. Next slide, please. In addition to these large capital projects, we have a number of programs identified in the plan. These programs were our way to deal with an uncertain future. There's significant investment in bicycle and pedestrian. That's another area that we get a ton of public feedback about. Significant increase in bus transit. Of all the feedback we've heard from the public, the number one demand, expanded bus transit. Investments in safety, investments in intersections. And now we face our own question marks. Next slide, please. Really, our challenge is twofold. Not only do we have to consider what the impacts are on our future investment plan, but we also have to reconsider what the impacts are on our approved programs themselves. Next slide, please. Without the dedicated and extension of the dedicated half-cent sales tax, our future is completely decimated. We lose over half of our available revenue, and the revenues that are left are restricted to very certain categories. We lose the flexibility that we built into the plan to make our dollars go further. It will have a catastrophic impact on our transportation network. Next slide, please. As I had mentioned, we're also now at the position where not only do we have to reconsider our future plan, we have to reconsider our existing programs that have already been developed. As you all know, transportation takes time. It takes time to develop these projects, it takes time to put them in place. Our current programs were built under the assumption that we would have an extension of the half-cent sales tax. Many of those improvements are dependent on continued investment, and now we are in a position where we might have to reconsider. Next slide, please. So what are the potential impacts? Next slide. One of the misnomers, if you will, that we hear down in the legislature was actually the misconception that there was a significant increase of investment into transit. And while that's true, the number one category that we actually saw an investment into was arterials and regional programs. This reflects two realities. Number one, the need to deal with an uncertain future. We don't quite know where things are going to go in the future, and we need to be able to be responsive to those needs. And number two, that's where the pinch is. Next slide, please. So what do I mean by that? So the slide on the screen shows total statewide highway user revenue funding growth going back to 2000, controlling for inflation. This has been traditionally the primary funding source for transportation investments across the state of Arizona. You go back to Proposition 300 and Proposition 400, HERF was the primary funding source for transportation investments. The bars demonstrate the total amount of statewide HERF collections controlled for inflation, and then the green block behind those shows the total statewide population. Next slide. So what does it mean? It means when you control for inflation, we actually collected less in 2021 than we did in the year 2000. And over the same amount of time, the state population has grown by more than 40%. You all have to do more with less. That puts us in a huge bind. Next slide, please. There's no question that if you were to take out the planned investment in arterial roads that we have in the extension plan, there will be a significant impact felt throughout the region. We have diminishing HERF revenues. The dedicated sales tax has been one of those funding sources that has been able to offset some of those impacts. Failure to extend the sales tax will result in significant impacts region-wide. We will have fewer new roadways. We'll have fewer widened roadways. Your agencies will be limited in their ability to respond to economic development opportunity. Economic development will suffer. Roadway conditions across the valley will get worse. Next slide, please. In the interim, there are a number of open questions about what we do on the arterial side. These are questions that we will have to work through over the coming months, including how do we transition the end of the Proposition 400 arterial program, and what do we do with some of the federal funding that flows directly to the region that we had programmed for innovative use in the extension investment plan. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, the story does not get any better in transit. Next slide. Transit in our region is unique. As we demonstrated early on with the peer region analysis, we are one of the few states that does not have statewide investment in transit. As a result, our transit is funded through a combination of local, regional, and federal resources. There was significant demand from the public to expand bus transit as part of our Proposition 400 extension development. As a result, the plan itself significantly increased the amount of funding going into bus transit operating expenditures. The veto not only puts into jeopardy that the future expansion of bus transit, but bus transit that's operating today. Next slide, please. The map on the screen shows all the local routes that were operating last fiscal year, and it breaks it down by funding source. Those in red are wholly funded by the region. Those in blue were partially funded by the region, partially funded by local agencies, and those in gray are entirely funded by local agencies. Next slide, please. Here's a similar map, but this is showing express service. Express service, of course, is tremendously popular and an effective way to deal with increasing levels of congestion. Lines in red are entirely funded by the region. Lines in blue, funded through a combination of region and local, and then the lines in gray are local. Next slide. So what does it mean? If the dedicated transportation sales tax goes away after 2025, all the lines in red are at risk. Those are lines that are operating today, and there is a significant amount of red on the screen. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, this probably underplays the total impact to the bus transit system. And that's because part of what occurs when you operate bus transit is you have to provide federally required ADA paratransit service within 3/4 of a mile. Currently, the region picks up nearly the entirety of those expenditures throughout the region. Without the regional sales tax, those expenditures are now shifted over to local agencies who will further have to make decisions about whether to scale back service or find revenues from additional sources. This, without question, will significantly impact the future of bus transit in the region. Next slide, please. In addition, we have a number of high capacity transit projects that are included in the extension. As you all know, you look at development patterns, we're seeing more and more infill. We are seeing higher and higher levels of density in the core center. High capacity transit is a very effective mode to serve these riders. All these future routes are at risk. Next slide, please. With the uncertainty we now have with the veto, the Valley Metro Board will have to deal with a number of really difficult issues, including should we continue to expand the bus transit system if there's not certainty about where the revenue sources will come from after 2025. Next slide, please. And finally, I want to touch on the Freeway Program. Next slide. So the map on the screen shows the current approved Proposition 400 Freeway Program. In addition to those projects that we have allocated funding towards that are included in the extension reflected in blue. Some of these projects are now at risk. Next slide, please. There's open questions on some of them, such as the I-10 widening. This is a very important statewide project. It's a very important project to the region. This will widen I-10, the last section of I-10, between Phoenix and Casa Grande. The region has allocated more than $220 million towards this project. There are questions now, if we do not have a continuation of the dedicated sales tax, should the region continue to make this investment, or should this funding be pulled back and applied to a project that is a higher priority for the region itself? We have significant funding as part of the Proposition 400 program into development or right-of-way acquisition for the State Route 30 corridor, more than $500 million. We were also scheduled to start final design for the easternmost section of that corridor. There are open questions about whether or not we should continue with those activities or if we should continue to go as quickly as we have been going. In addition, several important TI projects, I-10 Jackrabbit, I-10 Baseline, these are both projects that needed built yesterday. These projects are now at risk. Next slide, please. In addition, all of those freeway projects we have funded in the extension completely at risk. Anna Bob just gave a presentation talking through all the tremendous levels of development coming to this region. All that development is put at risk without the extension of Proposition 400. We called out just a few of the core economic areas seeing significant growth. This doesn't even include all the growth down in Buckeye and all the growth around South Mountain and the future State Route 30. All these projects are at risk. Next slide, please. We've been talking for the last 2 or 3 years about the freeway, the overlay of the freeway system and how the rubberized asphalt that was laid down 15, 20 years ago continues to deteriorate. This is something that ADOT continues to hear from the public on a daily basis. And as we've mentioned, once the rubberized asphalt really starts to deteriorate, it goes very quickly. This is all at risk. Next slide, please. There's no question that the future of freeways in Maricopa County without the dedicated sales tax extension is very bleak. There will be significant impacts. Our funding will have to be focused on meeting federal performance targets. And what that means is think state of good repair. Think of just trying to keep existing infrastructure up to the required levels. We will not be able to build new freeways. We will not be able to expand new freeways. We will not be able to add new interchanges to support future development. Statewide, the situation is much worse than in Maricopa County, and that's because we do have the dedicated half-cent sales tax. Without that, we will be in much the same position as the rest of the state. Next slide, please. One of the top questions we get from legislators and other interested parties is, well, can we just appropriate the money needed, the money that we would lose from the extension of Proposition 400 to continue forward with these much needed facilities? Or is there federal infrastructure funding now available? So I wanted to briefly walk you through an example. So the cost to build the Loop 303 extension, as well as just the center segment of State Route 30, is $2.5 billion. Next slide, please. Let's put that in comparison. The total allocation of HERF funding to our region over a 25-year period is the same exact amount as that one facility costs. In addition, if you look at some of the discretionary pots, the most likely pot to build this project is the MEGA program. There's $1 billion available total across the entirety of the nation. And of that, only half of it can go to projects over $500 million. Simply put, there is not enough money to build this facility absent the dedicated sales tax. Next slide, please. So we are now at the position, we are evaluating projects and beginning to slow down projects in the program. For instance, we were scheduled to start the final design of the easternmost sections of State Route 30. Those activities have been held off. Next slide, please. So there's a number of open questions. What do we do with the freeway project still on the books? Do we need to look at rescoping and reprioritizing those? Should we continue to proceed with design for future projects that are contingent on extension Proposition 400 when that future is uncertain now? These are questions that we will have to wrestle with over the coming months. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? Next slide. There's a ton of work underway here at MAG. In addition to focusing our efforts on the extension of Proposition 400, which is an exercise that consumes a significant amount of MAG staff time and effort, and we work tirelessly. We also continue our review of the existing program itself. We are assessing what the impacts of the delay are on project costs. Project costs will increase significantly. You look at State Route 30, that's a $2.5 billion facility. A delay by 1 year, if inflation is at 10%, is a significant amount of money. We will feel those impacts system-wide. We are also well underway with an economic impact of what the Proposition 400 extension effort will have, not only on the region's economy, but the state's economy. We anticipate that it will show dramatic results. Next slide, please. Continue to work very closely with member agencies, but really the key takeaway I have for you all today, or really where we need your help, is we need to make sure this message gets out. We've had the luxury of having the dedicated half-cent sales tax in place for the last 40 years. The need for the extension back in 2004, when our freeway system wasn't yet built, it was a little more apparent to the public. I can tell you that while it might not be overly apparent to the public, the cliff is every bit as steep as it was back in 2004, if not steeper when you look at what's at stake. And finally, we continue to research and explore all potential opportunities to bring the Proposition 400 extension forward to the voters as quickly as possible. And that's a discussion we will be having. We'll be having another discussion with our executive committee this upcoming Monday. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, the veto will and has had significant impacts on this region. Inaction will cost us, and it's really important to understand the magnitude of the impact of failure to extending this dedicated half-cent sales tax. At the joint meeting of TPC and Regional Council, the region did reaffirm its commitment to the plan. That is a plan broadly supported by the public. And while we do need to work with the legislature for enabling legislation, at the end of the day, it's the public that's going to be voting for the plan. And with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my presentation.
Thank you, John, for the sobering presentation. Are there members who have questions or comments? Great. Well, thank you. Well, more to come. Very much appreciate. Oh, excuse me, 1 second, Mr. Butler. Thank you, Mr. Banjer.
Thank you. John, I don't know if you're the one to answer this. Have we looked at any type of date when we feel like we've got to have something, a solution done and complete prior to other cities that may be forced to take actions just to support the ongoing projects and programs, particularly light rail operation and maintenance, with whatever path we feel is the best one forward on this?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Banger, members of the management committee, that's a good question. So as you're well aware, there's a number of different factors at play. When you're talking about transit operations, there's certainly impacts on contracts, for instance. And so these are all issues that we're working on. We're working closely with our partners at Valley Metro to get a full understanding of what the potential impacts are and what the potential timelines. Certainly, this is not a presentation I expect to be giving today. I don't think any of us expected to be here today. So, you know, I think doing more research into that particular item is just one of the many things that we have underway now.
Yeah.
Please, Eric.
Mr. Chairman, members of the management committee, first of all, I want to thank John Bolin and Butler Kester Thomas, who have, for the last 3 or 4 years, have really 24/7 have lived this issue. And John's working on trying to take my title of Dr. Doom, which I worked hard to earn during the Great Recession, but I'll be gladly give that to John. I think he's coming up very fast on that title. So I appreciate all this work. We have a lot going, and you know, there isn't an obvious path to the ballot right now. We understand that, and we certainly have talked to our elected leadership here about what some of the options are to get to the ballot. And so we'll continue those discussions. As John said, we have a executive committee meeting scheduled for Monday. We plan to have an executive session so we can discuss some of with our legal teams, discuss some of the issues related to getting back to the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. More to come. Thank you, John. So in the interest of time, item number 10, legislative update, we'll hold off on the legislative update if that is all right with staff today. And item number 11, request for future agenda items. Do we have any members that have a request for a future agenda item? Great, thank you. And moving to item 12 is comments from the committee. Any members have additional comments? So, well, thank you, members and guests. Next meeting for the management committee will be Wednesday, September 14th at 12 p.m. And there being no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.